For Political Innovation. My name is Nicole Klein. I'm with the Policy Circle, and it is my pleasure to introduce Katherine Gehl, who will be our speaker for this workshop. Katherine is the founder of the Institute for Political Innovation, but it was her business career that led to a novel approach to politics. Katherine was CEO of a $250 million manufacturing company that she eventually sold. And during a company strategy project in 2013, she had an epiphany that led her to apply the lenses of free market competition to classic industry analysis. Previously only applied to the private sector, and she has applied that now to politics. This approach is known as politics industry theory. I have never heard of this until I was formally introduced to Katherine, and it sheds light on root causes of political dysfunction and illuminates the potential power of one particular innovation that Katherine will be talking about today, a new election system for Congress called Final Five voting. In 2017, Katherine wrote a groundbreaking report out of the Harvard Business School that began to change the conversation about politics. And she followed that up with the book, The Politics Industry, How Political Innovation Can Break Partisan Gridlock and Save Our Democracy. Katherine is an active philanthropist and obviously has experience in building a network of supporters for an innovative cause, which is all about our session today. So please join me in welcoming Katherine, who will be leading our Building Coalitions for Political Innovation breakout session.
Nicole, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm thrilled to be here. I get to do this twice. And as I told the last group, one of my favorite things to do is find myself amongst a group of powerful, passionate women. I remember the first time I ever spoke to a room where it was just women, and I was working in politics at the time, and I got in front of this room of about 150 people, and I had never had that experience, so I didn't know it would be different. And all of a sudden, I was like, this is amazing. And I always have the same feeling every time I'm back, so thank you. Okay, so our title is Building Coalitions for Innovation, but I want to just change that quickly to say, let's call it 3 points about coalitions, and we'll take you through, okay? I'm going to start with a story about my daughter, who's now 16, but when she was 9, I had her in the car, and I said, because I say these things, Alexandra, did you know that our national debt is $19 trillion? And, whatever. And I said, oh yeah, and that's a really big number. And guess who's going to have to pay that back? So now she looked at me, pretty horrified. You? And I said, oh, no, not me, cute, but no, you're going to have to pay that back. And so she said, oh, me? What did I ever do? And I tell that story because it's funny, but also because that's always been an issue that I've cared deeply about. And there came a point in time, somewhat with the collapse of Simpson Bowles and our debt downgrade and government shutdowns and things, where I said, wow, we really can't run things anymore, in Washington, D.C. So it just symbolized that for me. And eventually, I sold my company, got involved in all of this political innovation stuff. So a few years later, in May of 2018, I was in a big ballroom in Milwaukee, and I was one of 20 co-hosts, and we were having this evening that was called, Competition in Politics. And of the 20 of us, there were Republicans and Democrats and independents and sort of unknowns, who are they? But nonetheless, pretty well-known people in our community. And we all invited 400 couples, so 800 of our closest friends, and about half of them were able to come. So we have this huge room, and I think they came because it was going to be an evening about politics with people that they thought agreed about nothing about politics, and so they just wanted to imagine what could we all possibly going to talk about, which brings me to a first slide. This is a photo from that night, and these are 2 of our co-hosts, and I will quickly summarize what they were saying here. So Andy got up. Well, he probably let Line speak first. Okay, so Line said that she has been a lifelong Democrat, very, very attached to progressive causes and a major donor. And then Andy said, yes, and I'm Andy, and I've been a lifelong Republican, and in 2016, I was the person in Wisconsin who hosted Trump for the fundraiser in my home. And then he said, something like, I don't agree with lying on much. And she said, yeah, and I don't agree with him on anything either. But they proceeded to, in a sense, surprise the audience then and say, but the reason that we're here tonight is because we found something that we agree on. And that is that Washington, D.C. isn't working for the country anymore. And we agree on that. And then they went further to say that they agree on this solution, which is called Final Five voting, which I'll talk about a little bit further. But after they said that, they pointed something out, which I think is really interesting. They said, you know what? It's going to take us many election cycles to pass this change in Wisconsin. And during that time, we are going to vote for different candidates. We are going to contribute to different organizations. We are going to be on the opposite side of almost probably, a jillion other issues. But we're going to stay together on this. But we're not giving up who we are and the things we believe in. And there's something here that we share. So I see that as just an interesting point of, my first point about coalition. So last night in the middle of the night, I got dictionary.com and I just looked it up. So coalition, a combination or alliance, especially a temporary one, between persons, factions, states, etc. And I would add to, especially a temporary one, I would also add, especially a limited one. Right, so their coalition is limited. It is limited to that particular idea that they have chosen to share. And think about it then that a coalition can be very powerful, but its power doesn't come from being a monolithic, homogeneous group that's united on everything, although these are very important kinds of groups as well. A coalition instead arises when different groups see a shared goal as important enough to overcome the things that otherwise divide them, and then they take different action together. So one of the actions that I am consistently inspired by that has come out of Wisconsin is sort of the put your money where your mouth is kind of action. So we care deeply about policy. I think all of us know that political contributions have an impact, and they can indicate what is important to people, the causes to which they donate, the candidates, et cetera. So we formed in Wisconsin this vehicle that's called the Conduit, and that allows you to have an interest in Wisconsin, and you can collect funds from many people that are for direct contributions to candidates, but you collect them as a group, and then you write one check out to, let's say I write a check to Sylvie, and then it will say, but that money came from Kathy, $10 came from Kathy, and $100 came from Amy, and, like that. And so we do that. And we have 22 co-sponsors on a bipartisan bill in our state legislature for Final Five voting. Our lead co-sponsor is a conservative, up-and-coming, young Republican serving in the armed forces, and he's our lead co-sponsor in the Senate. And then our lead in the House from the early days is a man named Danny Reamer, and he is a young, up-and-coming, also serving in the armed forces, Democrat, liberal from Milwaukee, and they do this together, and they wrote an op-ed about, what they don't agree on and what they do agree on, but why they agree on this. And so they, then plus the other 20 co-sponsors, we support. So once we collect this money in the Conduit, we donate it to everybody, which means that Republicans who donated to this have some of their money redistributed to Democrats. And Democrats have some of their money redistributed to Republicans. And that's unusual. And the question, I think, is why would they do something like that? Like in these days, that is not happening. Why would they do something like that? And because also, by the way, believe me, it's very painful. So when the time comes for the checks to go out, you have to actually call them and they have to approve it each time. They can't just wash their hands of it. It's like, okay, and now your money's gonna be divided this way. And then some people will call me up and say, is that other side really giving to my side? Because I'm giving to their side, So it's painful. But that shows more, look, we could have done it where all the Republicans that support us give to the Republicans and all the Democrats that support us give to the Democrats that are the co-sponsors, but we just want to make it clear how foundational this is to all of us and how it's above parties. So in any case, the question is, why would they do that? And I think that the answer that I like to think about is not one that in my words, it's of two people who wrote the foreword to this book that I put out a year ago, and they are also veterans. One is Mike Gallagher, who's a Republican from Wisconsin, and the other is Chrissy Houlihan, who's a Democrat from Pennsylvania. And when they wrote in this foreword, they said, you know, we went into the armed forces because we loved our country and we wanted to serve. Then we came home and we ran for Congress because we loved our country and we wanted to serve. When we were in the armed forces, we were on the same For America team. And now, for the exact same reasons, we choose to do something different, and we are automatically no longer on the same For America team. And that shouldn't be, and then they generously said, and it doesn't have to be, you know, if we can change some of the things that I talk about in that book, which makes me quite happy, but that is why all of us are in this odd coalition now, because we believe the same thing, which is that we want to respect all of the differences we have in this dynamic and diverse and brilliant democracy, but still find a way to know and to act as if we're on the same team in the big macro. Which brings me to point 2 about coalitions, because in a democracy, the ability to form a team and share a team, create a coalition, is a requirement for sustainable policy solutions to complex problems. So for example, no side is going to be able to solve the debt crisis that I have talked about on their own. It is not going to happen. And the problem that we see collectively in this coalition is that we don't have that kind of coalition building activity in Congress because building coalitions doesn't win elections. In fact, building coalitions is likely to lose elections. So here's a Venn diagram, just simple. So this activity, what we really need our legislators to do, we need at least a good number of them to go there and work to solve complex problems, which means they have to negotiate and cut deals and deal with trade-offs. But there's no connection between doing that, what we need them to do, and the likelihood they're going to get reelected. In fact, they're likely going to lose their jobs. And where they're going to lose those jobs is they're going to lose them in the party primary. Now, by the way, I think parties are super important. So when I talk about the party primary, I'm not impugning parties. We need very strong parties. So about 100 years ago in Wisconsin, and that's where I'm from, so I'll take some responsibility, we created party primaries. And it's a bit of a problem today, which is to say that right now, if it's a Democratic district, we all know, well, in 8 out of 10 cases, the Democrat who wins that primary, well, actually, if it's a Democratic district, whoever wins the Democratic primary is going to win the general. We know that. Even if everybody stayed home, you know, they're going to win the general. And it's the same if it's a red district, the Republican who wins that primary is going to win the general. The problem that creates is not that it changes necessarily who wins, for example. It's that because only 10% of people in the entire country participate in the party primaries that determine those winners, those are the only people, not only, the most important people that our legislators have to focus on if they want to keep their job. And they're, as far apart as these polls are, there is one thing that they really do agree on, and political science actually shows us that. They are defined more than any other single characteristic by how much they dislike the other side, which means that one of the things that they agree on to, in a sense, say to the people whom they elected is, don't work with the other side. Do not compromise. And then we'll reelect you, and if you do, we won't. Which means, let's take, for example, Simpson-Bowles, which was that grand bargain of debt deficit. And I'm not saying that's the only thing that ever needs to happen, but we'll just keep the example running through. We now have a system where you could have this highly negotiated agreement, which we did have, And when the legislators look at it, they say, yeah, we get that that's probably the best we can do, and that's a good idea, they'll say behind closed doors, but I can't vote for that because I'm a Republican and it includes $1 of tax increase. So I'm out, because I'll lose. And over here, I'm a Democrat, and I also agree with this person. We negotiated it together, but in the end, I can't vote for it because it includes $1 of benefit decrease. So I'm out. So we have forbidden them to do what needs doing. Effectively, it's like if we had our organizations and we hired people and we said, here's what we really need you to do to grow our organization, take advantage of the opportunities and really deliver in the marketplace. And if you do that really super well, we're going to fire you in 2 years. But do it anyway, because that would be good. And that's really what we've done with how we have people get and keep their jobs. And to point out just a bit further about how crazy it really is, the way that we've created this, which, by the way, has nothing to do with the Constitution. Okay, I usually carry a pocket Constitution. It's this short. None of these things are in there like party primaries. The problem is not in here. It is in some of the structures that we are living under now. So point being, here's how crazy it gets. Let's think again about our organizations. If we wanted to solve huge problems and grab huge opportunities in our organizations, we might bring everybody together in the room to work on it, talented people, and then say, okay, we're going to do this, it's going to be great, but quickly, before we get going, let's count off by twos, okay? Yeah, do that, like we did in grade school. And then we'll divide into warring teams, and then we'll get right to work. But that is the situation that we send people to DC, to deal with. And as many of you know, we actually have people physically sit on a different side. And by the way, they physically talk from different podiums. They, honest to God, you can't, like if you're a Democrat, you don't go over and stand at the Republican podium to talk to them. You only talk to your own people. That's not our biggest problem, but I just find it anecdotally interesting. Okay, so this is the reason why those of us in this odd coalition that I've been describing to you in Wisconsin support what I call Final Five voting. So Final Five voting is a new system of elections. We do two things. One, we get rid of party primaries. So we just have one primary, a single first round election, everybody running, regardless of parties, on the same ballot. We all go participate. We pick our favorite, the polls close, and now the top 5 finishers will advance to the general election. So that the decision is not made in the primary, and so that we have lots of competition in the general election, lots of people to choose from. If, for example, it's a Democratic district, you could have 3 Democrats. If it's a Republican district, you could have 4 Republicans, because you can have lots of visions of what it is to be a Republican, and a female Republican, and a male Republican, and young, older, like me. Then the second thing we do, now that we have those benefits of competition in the general, we have to figure out who's going to win. And one of the things we don't want to do is accidentally get the benefits of competition, then someone wins with 21%. Like if the votes split pretty equally 5 ways, then all of a sudden you've elected a minority winner. Well, we don't want to do that. So what we do is we use a system called instant runoff voting. And so Glenn Youngkin, who just won Virginia the governor's race, some of you may know that when the Republican Party in Virginia wanted to pick who would be their nominee, they used instant runoff voting. Because and parties have used it for years, both sides actually, but not all the time, but it's been around forever, and they often use it because it's a way to figure out who is the consensus when you have to get down to one and you have multiple, so that you don't end up with sort of with a non-consensus nominee in this case. So I think they are in Virginia quite happy at this moment with how they ran their primary by using instant runoff voting. So point being, Final Five voting is a top 5 primary, and then instant runoff voting in the general election so that we elect the person who has the broadest appeal to the most number of voters, which is what Glenn Youngkin got out of his convention voting. Final five voting is not, this is crazy because everything in politics is designed to change who's winning. Final five voting is not designed to do that. It is not designed to necessarily or primarily change who wins. It's designed to change what the winners have the freedom to do once they've won, and what they're incented to do once they've won when they're in Washington, D.C., which is that they now have the freedom to cut deals, to negotiate, to legislate, to look for a consensus. And they also don't have to give up any of their long-held and deeply held, passionate policy positions. So, for example, I would say a couple points. Final five voting doesn't make blue districts red. It doesn't make red districts blue. It creates conditions for strong parties, not weak parties. And it also doesn't suggest, and I just mention this because it can be a common misperception, that moderates are like the golden answer to everything. Actually, we need, in competition, innovation. And that arises when you have a lot of diversity. So what we want in America is we want to protect all of the diversity of opinion and all of the new ideas, et cetera, and still find a way, so have that in the five people, for example, and then still find a way to deliver a way forward from time to time in our complex democracy through these coalitions. Final five voting creates a situation in Congress where people have the freedom to do the job we've sent them there to do. And they can deal with those complex trade-offs, which is to say a trade-off between some revenue increase, some tax decrease. And it's just a general idea of a trade-off. I'm not talking any specifics, but we must make trade-offs in complex issues. I'm going to give you two real-life examples of how it actually works. So this was an idea when I first wrote about it in 2017, and luckily for me, an amazing man named Scott Kendall read it in Alaska. He created a ballot initiative. They passed this system in November of 2020. And they did it not just for the federal elections, which I really focus on, but they also did it for the state legislature and governor, lieutenant governor, et cetera. So here's a real life thing that happened. They were headed for one of those government shutdowns because they didn't have a budget deal. And they didn't shut down because they were able to form a coalition of some of the Republicans, some of the Democrats, some of the independents, all coming together on a non-party line basis to pass the negotiated consensus budget, and they averted their shutdown. Now, they don't all vote the same way every time, right? It's a temporary or an issue-based coalition that they have the freedom to engage in when it is good for their general election voters and for their state as they believe. Then there's a second example from 2018. So some of you might recall we passed really a major landmark piece of legislation in Washington, D.C. on criminal justice reform on a completely bipartisan basis, and it had been worked on for years by an odd bedfellows sort of organizations in the country. And I will tell you, I don't even know that much about it, and I'm sort of guessing some of you might be experts, but probably not. And I think one of the reasons none of us know very much about it is because we're actually not fighting about it. Because they reached an agreement. And they're not running on repealing it or running on how awful it was or whatever. They, agreed, and now it's sustainable. Because here's the thing about Final Five voting and about coalitions. We could all live in a fantasy world that we're going to get a trifecta someday and that our right vision is going to get enacted. But because we are a democracy, that side is going to change at some point, and then a whole group of people is going to come in whose entire purpose is to undo that. So we will need to find sustainable solutions over time, and the ones that are sustainable are the ones where the hard work is done up front to get some kind of a coalition to move it forward. Now this brings me to my last point, which is about the policy circle. So I am in love with the policy circle, and I knew about it years ago, but I first really got it in my head when I got to do, for my book, an interview with Laura Cox Kaplan on her podcast, She Said, which is the greatest name, by the way. And And she was telling me about it, and I live in Chicago, so I knew about Sylvie Legere and her great work. Long story short, here I am, and I think the Policy Circle is amazing, and here's one of the reasons why. Because the effort is to have evidence-based discussions, shared fact discussions, without an overt political bias, okay? And then the second effort, which is my favorite part, is to have women then engage. So it wasn't, let's just get educated so we can have opinions about things but make no difference, which a lot of us do. I mean, that's like a lot of what Twitter is. I'm not saying you guys do Twitter, but I'm saying like a lot of the country is engaged in having opinions and not engaging in making a difference. So the Policy Circle is saying, let's engage in making a difference. And so what I think about coalitions is there's a choice for engagement that we all make at times in our lives. One way to engage, which is a very important way, is to form a group of like-minded people and be passionately for X thing. Like if you're a group of academics at a think tank and you do not want to cut corners on the theory and the ideology and the purity of X, Y, and Z, we need that kind of intellectual rigor, et cetera. So let's say we have a lot of rigorous groups who are for passionately this, that. Great. And you can also engage in being a bridge builder, in forming a coalition that builds the bridges between the passionate, ideologically pure, intellectually rigorous, et cetera, here and this over here, and builds a bridge that makes that give us benefit in the real world that we live in our real and shared democracy. So, my friend Sylvie is telling me I'm almost out of time, which is good because I'm almost done. Okay, we need both kinds of engagement. You can't build bridges between ideas that are not there. But so I value both. What I will say to you guys is there's a market opportunity in the bridge building sector, in the coalition building sector. It is not a crowded marketplace. So you can definitely get in. You can definitely lead, and women are going to be the best leaders of it, okay? And there's a woman, she had to leave, she was at the previous one. She, a Republican woman in Illinois, negotiated with a Democrat woman in Illinois for like 3-4 years, she said, to get this pension deal done that they passed. Later the Illinois Supreme Court threw out, so we are still broke. But they did that thing together for all those years. So she came up to tell me about it because what Final Five voting does, but some people do just because they're courageous in the meantime, is it creates this connection between coalition building on complex problems and the likelihood that you're going to get reelected. This now becomes the way for success, at least for a good number of people. So the Policy Circle can help people get engaged in the sort of passionate ideology group, as well as the bridge building group. And I think that's what's really interesting is that Nicole told me that she talked to Sylvie during the break, and Sylvie said that when she was forming the Policy Circle with Angela and Kathy, that one of the names they looked at was She Builds Bridges. Like, okay, I love it. I hope you're still there, Sylvie. I love it. She builds bridges. And now I can't take it because I just told you it was her idea, not ours. But in any case, I want to close with a quick story. So I have a friend from high school. We're young Republicans together. And we got together a few years ago about this thing that I'm doing in Wisconsin. She's still really, or at least her family's very involved politically. And she said to me, by the way, she did massive due diligence on this. She was not like, oh yeah, sounds great, but she's totally in. And she said, aren't you surprised? Like, aren't you just shocked? You have all these people who don't agree on anything, and all these business leaders, and all these organizations, and people from rural area, and Madison, and you could never have thought that you would actually get these people to agree on this. And I said, No, Kelly, I am not surprised, because there is nothing in me, and I think if you think probably nothing in you, in your life experience, well, I don't know, I mean, I hope, I will say, in your life experience, in what we were taught about this country when we were growing up, and what we tell our children about this country, there's nothing in that that says that if you take an idea to fellow American citizens that could create a different future for us in Congress, that they're going to say, you know what, no, thank you. I really kind of like what we have. I'm going to have more of this. Let's keep doing this, because this seems pretty great to me. I mean, they're just not going to say that. Now, people think they're going to say that, because when we have these two choices, and there's nothing wrong with only two choices, but by the way, which we could have a separate conversation about, but when you have them, if you're disappointed with this side, it doesn't make you believe that this is the right side now. If you're disappointed with this side, it doesn't make you believe this is the right side. So people think that we are so unbelievably far apart. People want something different. They want bridge building. They want to see us solve problems for our lifetimes and for the future lifetimes. And I think, by the way, the women are going to do it. So I'm not surprised to Kelly, and let there be bridge builders. She builds bridges. Thank you.